When I was growing up in Colorado, we lived in the country. On our property, across from a small creek, there was a beautiful tall cottonwood tree that had been growing there for many, many years. This tree stood tall and majestic, its branches and leaves full and beautiful. Then one year, we started to hear talk of a drought. Little rain fell, and for the next 10 years we saw very little rain, and the creek eventually dried up. We worried about that tree once the water was gone. It stopped producing leaves, but otherwise it still looked pretty good. But one day in a big windstorm, one of the large branches broke off from the main trunk. When we looked inside, the tree was hollowed out. The lack of nourishing water over time had taken its toll and slowly, irreparably damaged the tree. Though outwardly still beautiful, it would never again be what it was meant to be. The same is true for children. Stunted children are those who are smaller than well-nourished children of the same age. Though outwardly they may look healthy, over time they haven't had the nutrients needed to grow tall and strong. They don't fight off illness easily, and they don't develop as well as better nourished children. For years, experts have debated the possible reasons why we have not seen improvements in this area of health, despite all of the work that's been done. So what could be the reason that we're still seeing all of this stunting? Is it a lack of latrines? A lack of access to clean water? Is it environmental conditions or poor nutrition? The easy answer is that we know all of these factors play a part in impacting child survival. In response, we've built latrines, we've worked to improve access to clean water, and we've taught on the importance of hand washing and good nutrition. Although we've made good progress in child survival, we still find that stunting is widespread. We are already doing so much. Aren't we doing enough? Is there something that we're missing? We know that the window of opportunity for improving nutrition is very small. From this graph, where the gray line represents normal weight and the age of the child runs along the bottom in months, we can see that most stunting happens in the first 1,000 days, pregnancy through the first 2 years. We also know that most of this stunting actually starts in the earliest months of a child's life. And despite all of our efforts, we can still see they continue to be stunted for the rest of their young lives. We also know that this stunting occurs across all regions of the world. You might also ask, a child is a little short, so why do we care? We care because the importance of good nutrition during pregnancy and the first 2 years of life has been proven to be critical for early brain development and lifelong health. Nutrition will also lay the foundation for future school success, social ability, and productivity in later life. Undernutrition also directly affects brain development. Here we see normal brain cells on the left, with a lot of neural branching, just like that healthy tree I talked about earlier. These branches are what brain cells use to reach out and connect with other brain cells so that different regions of the brain can communicate quickly and efficiently with each other. As for the cells on the right, we see a much different picture. These brain cells from a stunted child have much more limited, shorter branches, which slows and hinders a developing child's brain processes. Globally, we also see that stunting is a big problem. 24% of the world's children under age 5 are stunted. That's 165 million children not reaching their full potential. So what is causing all this stunting? Is it because pregnant mothers are malnourished? We know that malnourished mothers give birth to babies that are both smaller and shorter. Yet so far there hasn't been good, proven interventions that improve child outcomes in this area. It's estimated that 30 to 50% of stunting is due to what happens to the developing baby during pregnancy. That's significant, but it still leaves 50 to 70% unaccounted for. Is it because of poor child nutrition? That would seem to make sense, right? But in a review of the effectiveness of complementary feeding interventions in developing countries, the best studies showed only a slight improvement. Surprisingly at best, diet solved only 1/3 of the stunting problem. What about diarrhea? What percentage of child deaths caused by diarrhea do you think are preventable through water, sanitation, and hygiene, or wash-related interventions? 30%? 60%? 80%? Over 80%? The answer? Over 80%. Poor water, sanitation, and hygiene conditions have been linked to over 6% of the total global burden of disease. This leads to 2.4 million deaths every year due to diarrhea and the malnutrition that follows. Some claim that poor water, sanitation, and hygiene accounts for as much as 50% of the maternal and childhood underweight. This is primarily due to the vicious cycle between diarrhea and undernutrition, where one makes you vulnerable to the other. The Lancet Maternal and Child Nutrition Series estimated that even if we implemented hygiene and sanitation interventions with 99% coverage, it would only reduce the occurrence of diarrhea by 30%, reducing the prevalence of stunting by just 2.4%. That's not a lot, right? So although the role of water and sanitation in regards to diarrhea has been widely studied, the contribution of diarrhea to stunting remains debatable. So if it's not maternal malnutrition, and it's not childhood nutrition, and it's not diarrhea, what is causing all this stunting? Could it be what clinicians are now calling environmental enteropathy? Could this be the missing piece of the puzzle? Environmental enteropathy, or EE, is currently considered a major cause of stunting, anemia, and immune system activation. If you're wondering what enteropathy means, it simply means any disease of the intestine, primarily the small intestines. Environmental enteropathy is an inflammatory condition of the small intestine caused by a person's environment. It is the small intestine that's primarily responsible for absorbing nutrients from our food. Without good absorption, we don't grow and develop as we should. On this slide, you can see on the left a picture of a healthy intestine with a lot of folds and surface areas through which nutrients can be absorbed into the body. But on the right, due to constant inflammation, the intestine cannot let nutrients in as it should. Much like parched, dry soil does not let in rain, the cell wall that normally blocks toxins from entering the body allows them in due to the leaky nature of the inflamed cell wall. Now using our earlier example of a tree planted beside a stream, imagining a mudslide occurring upstream and the river becomes blocked or diverted. Our tree no longer receives the nourishing waters it needs. Its bark becomes weak and is no longer able to protect it from infection. So the tree becomes sick and no longer grows and thrives. For the child, this low-level immune system activation we've been speaking of diverts many of the nutrients away from a child's physical growth to infection fighting, leading to more stunting, anemia, and a poor response to vaccines. This puts children at risk throughout their lives. Researchers wanted to understand what could possibly explain all of this immune system activation. They chose two countries, Zimbabwe and Peru, where they found that sanitation was highly valued, and if people did not have a latrine, it was primarily because they could not afford one. Infant stools were considered less offensive than adult stools, hand washing was seldom done with soap, and children frequently were fed cold, leftover food. 20 babies were observed for 6 hours each, and the observers recorded everything that went into a child's mouth, how often, and whether it was visibly dirty. Then they returned to the site the next day and collected samples of the most frequent and dirtiest things that children were observed to have put into their mouths. What did they find? It won't surprise anyone to hear that fingers were the things that were most frequently put into a child's mouth, and that 75% of the time they were visibly dirty. But what surprised observers was what also went into a child's mouth: dirt and chicken poop. Children ate on average 11 bites of soil, along with picking up stones, putting them in their mouths, and eating chicken poop. What they observed was that babies were often fed on the ground, in the yard, or on the floor of the kitchen. Using E. coli as a measure of fecal contamination, researchers gathered samples from the baby's food, drinking water, soil in the laundry area, and chicken feces. Here's what they found. The soil in the area where the laundry was done was significantly contaminated. Mothers would wash out babies' soiled nappies and then empty the water right there on the ground where the babies would then sit and play, often putting dirt from the area right into their mouths. In addition, chicken feces were tested, as this was often observed to be picked up by a child and put into their mouths. You can see from the table how highly contaminated it is. Clearly, kids must stop eating dirt and chicken poop. So what can be done to stop this ongoing immune system activation that is having a negative impact on children's health? Many of us are familiar with the World Bank's routes of fecal transmission. This is where we see transmission occurring through feces, fluids, fingers, flies, floors, and food, and the main methods used to block transmission. Clearly, we need to add a few more barriers around wash activities for babies to help keep young children safe in their critical developmental years. Now, I'm not saying that we have all the answers or that this is easy, but certainly something must be done to create change. Some of the current recommendations include a new area of wash called baby wash. Effective baby wash interventions include a protective play space, washable mat, or playpen to protect a child from contaminated soil and animal feces, especially chickens. Infant hand washing with soap when outside of the protective play space. Caregiver hand washing with soap after contact with feces and before preparing or serving food. Safe disposal of feces, especially of children's. Water treatment. And avoiding feeding leftover food to children or to be sure to reheat before serving. With baby wash interventions, we will see improved sanitation and hygiene behaviors, leading to less fecal ingestion by babies, healthier guts with less inflammation, and ultimately better growth for our children, and most likely for moms as well. In summary, environmental enteropathy is a major cause of child stunting. Fetuses and newborns are not born with it. People acquire it when they move into a developing country, and they lose it when they move out. It is widely believed to be the result of high exposure to fecal contamination in an environment with poor sanitation and hygiene. So here's the one thing I want you to be sure to know. To reduce environmental enteropathy, we need to get the feces out of the environment, out of the water, off the hands, and out of the food we eat. So together we can finally break the cycle of oral fecal contamination and the chronic stunting that negatively impacts our children for life.